Hello and welcome to the webinar, The Adventures of Myles Standish. My name is Rachel Jones, your membership manager at Dumbarton House, your national headquarters. Throughout the program, if you have any technical issues, please feel free to put them in the questions box and I will do my best to help out if I can. Throughout the program, there will be some videos. If you have any issues seeing the videos, try logging out of the webinar and coming back in. We'll still be here. And if you have any issues hearing the videos, they're all at different volumes. You may have to adjust your volume throughout the program on your own computer. Great. At the end of the program, there might be some opportunity for some questions. If so, please put them in the questions box as well. Finally, this session is being recorded and will be available later. So if you do have any technical issues, you'll always be able to view the program at a later time. Okay, and now Denise West will begin the program. Denise?
Wow, well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the NSCDA Miami Town Committee Annual Fundraiser. We are so delighted that you have joined us. And today we're going to meet Myles Standish, the military leader of the Mayflower and Plymouth Colony. If you've attended one of our events in the past, you know that Robert Dawson's reenactments are a real treat. Now, normally, as you can see from these photos, we gather in person, we greet one another with big hugs, we get to chat over coffee and enjoy refreshments while purchasing raffle tickets, hoping to win some of the beautiful baskets that people really, really enjoy receiving, or winning, I should say. So this year it's different, and it's different for everybody. But despite COVID, we decided, let's go ahead and continue this event virtually. And instead of selling tickets, we would provide it as a free Friendsgiving event. So thank you for coming. I know you can't see each other, but I want you to know that we have over 100 people registered for this event. So thank you for being here. By the way, I just want to say stay to the end because we are going to be giving away some baskets at the closing. You know, even a virtual event takes a lot of work. And so I want to give a big thank you to the committee members, most of whom are pictured here, for working so hard. And also especially to Anna Ellert, who has coordinated and chaired this particular fundraising event. You know, we could not have done this virtually without the digital talents of our Miami Dame, Sarah Gerber, and Rachel Jones, who you just saw a few minutes ago at NSCDA headquarters in Washington, D.C. Thank you all so much for shepherding us through this most unique event for us. We also appreciate the NSCDA Florida State support from our executive director, Betsy Towers, and our state president, Jane Arnold, who you're going to meet shortly. While this event is free, it's still a fundraiser for two projects. Any donations that we receive will go 100% to providing care packages to our deployed military personnel and our NSCDA Historic House Museum, which is the Jimenez Facio House. Our next two speakers are going to explain to you these two events, or projects, I should say. Jane Arnold is the president of the National Society Colonial Dames of America in Florida, and she's going to tell you about NSCDA and the Jimenez Facio House. Next, Phyllis Parsons, our Miami Town Patriotic Service Chair, will explain our project to benefit our deployed troops. Thank you, Jane Arnold, for joining us from Jacksonville.
Thank you so much, Denise, and thank you to the Miami Town Committee, which is a great committee, and I appreciate all your support to the Dames and to the Jimenez Facio House. This is an exciting event, and I'm so glad to be a part of it. We take great pride in our mission statement, which reads, the National Society of the Colonial Dames of America in the state of Florida actively promotes an appreciation of our national heritage through historic preservation, patriotic service, and national projects. The National Society of Colonial Dames of America was founded in 1891, is an unincorporated association of 45 corporate societies with over 15,000 members. One of the enduring legacies of the NSCDA is the field of historic preservation. The first museum under the Dames was the Van Cortlandt House in New York, opened in 1897 by the New York Society. NSCDA has continued to acquire and maintain properties important to our history of this nation. We have been highlighted in the 2007 issue of Antiques magazine. In November of 2000, the National Trust for Historic Preservation presented us the Trustee Emeritus Award to NSCDA. This was excellence in the stewardship of historic places for over 100 years. We have 41 diverse properties which are owned outright by the corporate societies of the NSDCA. These are now called the Great American Treasures, which is compiled in a book that you can get and also have the opportunity to visit all these museums. Through collaborative efforts, there are 13 impressive collections owned by NSCDA. 30 properties are supported by volunteers, and that adds up to about 84 properties, which include Southern plantations, schools, churches, log cabins, adobe buildings, and a French colonial house. We have 3 properties that are very special to the NSCDA. The Dumbarton House, which was already mentioned in Washington, D.C., is a federal period house, which is our national headquarters for NSCDA. Gunston Hall was built by George Mason in the 18th century. It's owned by the Commonwealth of Virginia and managed by the NSCDA. Sulgrave Manor, the ancestral home of the Washington family, has received major financial support and board representation by the NSCDA since 1925. Our society, the National Society of Colonial Dames of America in the state of Florida, was incorporated in 1899 by Caroline May Prevard, as you'll see her picture on the screen. And the founders, in the next slide, please. The founders, which you'll see in the picture, which is a great, strong group of women, in 1939, they found the Jimenez Facio House. They bought the house from the Facio heirs to use as a state house museum. As you can see, it looks like we're under great support from the very beginning. The Jimenez Facio House was originally owned by a Spanish merchant, Andre Jimenez, in 1798. He used it as a general store and tavern and family residence. In 1821, over 200 years ago, which we're celebrating this year, Florida became a U.S. territory. In 1823, the house was bought by Carolyn Cook and Eliza Whitehurst and operated as Mrs. Whitehurst Boarding House. In 1838, Sarah Petty Anderson bought the house. And in 1851, she retained Louisa Facio to manage the boarding house, thus the Jimenez Facio House. There are many accolades for the Facio House, our great museum. It is located on the corner of Avilés and Cadiz Streets in St. Augustine. It's considered one of St. Augustine's best preserved Spanish colonial dwellings. It sits on America's first platted thoroughfare in the center of the city's oldest community, which dates to St. Augustine's original town plan of 1572. It is one of the first museums in American history to interpret 19th century women's history, having 3 owners of a boarding house, 3 female owners of a boarding house. It's described as one of the most authentic historic house museums in the country. There have been multiple archaeological excavations which document the property's occupation by Native Americans, the Spanish, and the British. And a rare Spanish Caravaca cross from around 1650 was also found at the site several years ago. And here is the Caravaca cross, and it happens to be on a mask that you can get at the store at the Fascio House. Today, the museum is the #1 place to visit on the TripAdvisor in St. Augustine. So you can see we have many reasons to just love our house, and we have so much support throughout the state, through our 9 town committees who constantly support the house and support the Dames. So I want to show you a video about the Jimenez Fascio house that you'll get a clearer understanding and actually be able to see parts of the house. And if you'd like more information, you can go to the website, which is jimenezfasciohouse.org. So thank you so much, and I enjoyed being able to tell you more about the Dames in the house, and please enjoy the following video.
I'd like to tell you about a place in the oldest section of St. Augustine, south of the plaza. On the oldest street in North America stands the historic Jimenez Fascio house. It was built in 1798 as a Spanish merchant's home and place of business, and later became St. Augustine's most fashionable boarding house, owned and operated by women from its earliest days. Within the coquina stone walls, everything has been carefully researched for historical accuracy. Every room tells a unique story about early visitors, their interests, mysteries, and secrets. TripAdvisor says the Jimenez Fascio house is one of the top attractions in St. Augustine. You're invited to take the Jimenez Fascio house guided tour to the past, where every room has a story.
Thank you, Jane, for presenting the video of this historic house, which is truly a national treasure. My name is Phyllis Parsons, and I'm the Patriotic Service Chairman of the Miami Town Committee. As you all know, we remain a nation at war, and we have men and women in our Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, including National Guard, deployed in dangerous areas of the world. The U.S. military is deployed in more than 150 countries around the world, with more than 160,000 of its active duty personnel stationed outside the United States and its territories. Active combat deployments consist of 2,500 troops in Iraq and 2,500 in Afghanistan. I don't think we realize how much these men and women affect our lives. Each member joins voluntarily and takes an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and will obey orders of the President of the United States. These men and women make daily sacrifices to keep us safe. Today, we are raising funds to support these heroes by sending them cards and care packages to let them know of our grateful appreciation. Each year, we have at least 2 packing parties during which we stuff large flat rate boxes with as many useful items and non-perishable snacks as possible. Some of our boxes weigh over 11 pounds. The cost of only one box is over $70. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, we could pack and ship in one day up to 63 boxes. It's always heartwarming to receive letters and pictures from our recipients. Today, we're so honored to have Senior Master Sergeant Scott Humphreys. Scott is originally from Indiana and entered the U.S. Air Force in the year 2000. He has served on active duty and reserve ever since. He's presently serving in the reserves at Youngstown Air Reserve Station, Ohio. Thank you for being here, Scott.
Hello, my name is Senior Master Sergeant Humphreys. I'm a Civil Engineering Superintendent with the 910th Civil Engineering Squadron out of Youngstown Air Reserve Base, Ohio. Back in 2018, I served with the 332nd Civil Engineering Squadron. While I was there for 6 months, we received some care packages from the Miami Town Committee, and I just want to send a big thank you for those care packages. The guys in my unit, which totaled over 100, we were able to use those toothbrushes, deodorant, toothpaste. There were several other goodies in there. I can't remember them all, but it's a big deal getting those care packages, because sometimes our wives or families, sometimes they get busy, sometimes they forget to send certain things. And any help that we can get from anybody, especially you guys, is very helpful. The place I was deployed, we had a limited services, and being out in the desert in the middle of nowhere, sometimes it's hard to get in supplies. So just a big thank you for all that you do, and I hope you guys continue to put forth the care packages whenever you can, to the guys that are deployed. So thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you, Phyllis. That was wonderful. And thank you, Scott. Providing these care packages for our service women and men like Scott is the primary project of our Miami Town Committee, and it makes a difference, as you can see. Thank you, Phyllis, and thank you everyone for your support. Now I would like to introduce a man I think you all know and have heard present many historical figures, such as Robert E. Lee, Henry Flagler, Buffalo Bill Cody, and Leonardo da Vinci. Indeed, this is his 9th reenactment for us. Before we found him, he operated historic tours aboard the HMS Bounty for Turner Broadcasting. He is a professional actor, makeup artist, stage fight choreographer, costumer, historical researcher, college lecturer, and writer. So without further delay, I am pleased to present our Robert Dawson as Myles Standish.
Good morrow to you. I am Captain Myles Standish, and I am here today to tell you the story of the Plymouth Plantation, Plymouth Colony, founded in the year 1620. Now, I will be completely frank with you. I have no idea how I am communicating with you through this mystery, this magic, but I am grateful for the opportunity to share with you my story. Let us begin. They say that there's going to be a brief interruption here as we select something. There. Ah, yes, there we go. There we have the images for you. Now, as I said, my name is Captain Myles Standish. I was the military and defense advisor for the young colony of Plymouth many, many years ago. And this is the story of how I came to work for the separatists and the life and the creation of the colony itself. Here you see the lowlands of Holland. I was quite familiar with it. Many years ago, I was sent here by our good Queen Bess, along with many other Englishmen, to fight against the Spanish Catholics. They were trying to subdue the Protestant Dutch and convert them into Catholics. King Philip II of Spain was trying to do this throughout all of the continent itself. But here was a struggle, and our good Queen sent our troops in support of the Protestants of that land. This was the site that we came upon there. All of the continental area was involved in some sort of battle or war based upon religious intolerance. And here you see the result. The Catholics tried to convert people by killing them. We went to their defense. This is my commander, Sir Horatio Vere. We fought many a battle against the Spanish Catholics there. Eventually, when good Queen Bess passed away, she was replaced by James I. He would actually become engaged in a peace treaty. Those of us who had sacrificed so many years and so much effort and our lives and blood to try to help the Protestants there felt that as though we were betrayed by our king. We are very unhappy with him, but it was indeed a time of peace. I would remain in this land with my wife, Rose, and we would reside in a small place that was called Leiden. Leiden in those days was the center of the art world, and it was also the center of all sciences as well. A very active place. And it was here that I would encounter the separatists of England and eventually be taken in their employ as their military advisor. The Dutch, despite the fact that their country was racked by war, were very prosperous at this time. They had become engaged in trade with the Far East. The Dutch East India Company was doing very, very well. And that brought a great deal of wealth and prosperity to Holland, to the Dutch. It is shown, as you see here, in the appointments of their homes. Those who were wealthy merchants doing very well. They had libraries, something was very, very, very unique. The light was wonderful. The light, in fact, was what attracted the famous artist Vermeer. It became almost an integral part of all of his paintings. I share with you this image. This is the bedroom, as it were, and the little curtained area that you see on the right-hand side. That is the bed. It is actually walled about the bed because of the inclement climate, the intolerable climate, of course, of Holland itself, very damp and very cold. And what is interesting about this is beneath the bed itself, you see where the curtained area is and a little transom that goes across, right below there is a little opening. And what they would do is they would put hot coals in there to warm the bolster above it. Something that I'd never seen in any other country. And here is another example of that magnificent light that came through these great windows of theirs. And this was what attracted Vermeer. Where did all of the wealth of the Dutch come from? Well, with the trade, the Dutch East India Company. They were importing from China silks and also porcelain. From India, they were getting spices from the Spice Islands as well. And there was a brisk trade, a very lucrative trade in tulip bulbs as well. And it was making the people of Holland very, very wealthy at this particular time. Here you see many of the burghers and wealthy merchants of Leiden all gathered together to have their portraits taken to show off their wealth, of course, and how well they were all doing. Many people aspire to this, and they would hire artists, of course, to try to record their images for their families and for posterity itself. One of the men who was engaged in portrait painting was this artist fellow. I believe his name was Van Rijn, Rembrandt van Rijn. And he, like many others, were engaged in painting the portraits of these people. And here you see the lady on the left showing off a vast amount of lace, very expensive lace. And also the fellow to the side showing his very costly cloak with its gold trim, his doeskin gloves. They all wanted to have their images recorded so that people in the future would know how well they had done for themselves. Now, amidst all this wealth, there was a group of people who were not very happy with this prosperity. They were the separatists. They weren't Dutch. These were people who had fled actually from England, and they were escaping religious persecution. But the lowlands, Holland, the Netherlands, was known for its tolerance of other religions, and so they came to practice their religion freely and openly in Holland, in Leiden, as a matter of fact. Unfortunately, their children that were born to them in this foreign land were growing up Dutch. They were speaking the Dutch language. They were trying to emulate the Dutch in their ostentatious dress, and this was totally against the precepts of the separatists' policies, their beliefs. So they were not very happy there. They wanted to find some place where they could go elsewhere, to move again to a place where they could practice their religion freely. Why? Why was it so necessary for Englishmen to flee their country, to get away from England itself? Because like the continent, England was engaged in periods of intolerance of religion as well. I suppose it all began with good King Henry VIII. He was a fine Catholic king. He married a Catholic woman, Catherine of Aragon. She bore him a daughter, Mary. But the problem was the king desired more than anything else in the world an heir, male heir. And apparently Catherine of Aragon could not produce a male heir. So he looked about for someone who could. He would fall in love with a woman by the name of Anne Boleyn. She was beautiful, she was educated in France, and he thought she was the perfect person. The problem being that the king was already married. He sent emissaries to Rome, to the Pope, asking for a dissolution of the marriage. But the Pope sent back word saying that he was a Catholic king, he could not divorce. What was he to do? He sent his emissaries back. They pleaded, they cajoled, they sometimes threatened. But the Pope stood firm. He would not renege. And the king was forced to exclaim, "To hell with Rome. I will establish my own church, and the king himself will be the head of this church." For this action, he was excommunicated from Rome. That was fine with him. Now he could divorce Catherine. He could marry Anne Boleyn, which he did. He made her Queen of England. And in gratitude, she bore him another daughter. They tried again. This time, she gave birth to a son. But the king seemed cursed because the boy was stillborn. Now, Anne Boleyn was very worried. Henry was very worried that he'd never have an heir. He began to drum up charges of infidelity against his own queen. She was tried by his advisors, she was found guilty, and she was beheaded. Now, the result of that was that the king would eventually marry 6 times. 6 times. And finally, a son was born to the king, young Prince Edward. But the curse seemed never to leave Henry. For Edward though he survived birth, did not live to his maturity. When King Henry VIII died, there was no heir, and the throne and the crown devolved to his eldest daughter, Mary. But Mary was the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, a devout Catholic. And so England went from being Catholic to now then being Anglican, and then it went back to being Catholic again. She would not tolerate the Anglicans. She called them heretics. She burnt them at the stake, which earned her the sobriquet of Bloody Mary. She would marry, but she married Philip II of Spain. Now, I don't know what you know or what your understanding of country matters may be, but it is impossible to produce an heir when the husband is in one country and the wife abides in another country. So they had no children, and Mary grew gravely ill. She summoned her half-sister Elizabeth to her. Elizabeth thought she was being summoned to be executed, to be gotten out of the way. But no, Mary offered her the throne and the crown of England if she would only promise to keep England a Catholic kingdom. Elizabeth promptly replied in her own manner, famously replied in her own manner, "I will do what I think best for my people." This was not what Mary wanted to hear. But Mary died. She died, and Elizabeth became the Queen of England. And she would be a fine queen as well. She would tolerate the Catholics, even though the Catholics, many of them, were plotting her demise, her death. They were trying to assassinate her. Mary, Queen of Scots, openly plotted against her, and she would lose her head for that action. And others would try as well to assassinate the Queen, but still she would tolerate the Catholics while promoting the Anglican faith throughout England. Well, you may be aware that when Queen Elizabeth died, having served England nobly for 45 years, she had earned her own sobriquet of the Virgin Queen. She did not marry. She had no heirs. So when she died in 1603, what was England to do? Who was to receive the crown? The next person in line was James VI of Scotland, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, who was beheaded for trying to kill Elizabeth. So he became James I of England, and he brought with him his own religion. Oh, it was he had grown up in the Scottish Kirk, and it was part Catholic and part Protestant, a blend of the two. He had even written his own Bible, the King James Bible. And when he came to England, if people did not join his faith or accept his faith, they would be persecuted. This caused, once again, like throughout all of the continent, it created great tension, religious tension. Nobody knew what to do. There was a group called the Puritans, and they informed the king that if only he would divest himself of the trappings of Rome, that they could accept his faith. But there were still others who could not. And one of those groups was the separatists, the people to whom I became attached. The separatists believed that the Church of England at that time was corrupt and immoral. They would not join the church. And so their religion was outlawed. Their beliefs were outlawed, and they would be pursued by many spies and informers in the pay of King James I. Life became intolerable for these separatists. Their religious sect had begun in the small village of Scrooby, and there they would worship in secret, going to one another at the congregants' houses, and they would have their services there, and at a cover of night, and they would sneak home again. Life was not very good for them. Here are their leaders. On the left, you see William Bradford, who would eventually become governor of the Plymouth colony, and William Brewster, who was one of the lay ministers and became very important religious head of the church. John Robinson was the pastor, but he would not come to the New World with the others. He would remain behind to tend to his flock who did not choose to go to the New World. And the last person on the right that you see is Edward Winslow. He is not well known, but he was the man who was responsible for creating all of the treaties that we would form with the Indians, the natives in the new land that we were going to. This was a religious group. They prayed to God, but at the same time, they had no idea how to defend themselves, how to protect themselves in a hostile new land that they were going to. They needed to find someone to serve as their military advisor and in charge of their defenses. I was not their first choice. The fellow on the right was their first choice. That is Captain John Smith of the successful Jamestown colony. They wanted him. He was too expensive, thank goodness. He was too expensive, and they were afraid that he was so famous, so well known, that he might become very powerful and become a tyrant. And so they decided to go with their second choice, which was a humble captain, Myles Standish, myself. Now, in order to find this new colony, it was necessary to make a business arrangement with someone capable of financing and organizing this. And they met a man, John Robinson met a man by the name of Thomas Weston. And he was a member of the merchant adventurers. Now, adventurers meant people who wanted to invest in an enterprise and receive some sort of financial return for it. And so the merchant adventurers offered the separatists an offer that they could not refuse. They were offered to work for the merchant adventurers, to be indentured to them for a 7-year period. They would provide the merchant adventurers with cut, sawn timber. They would provide furs from trapping and dried herring from fishing, and a certain portion of their crops as well. And in return, after 7 years, the colonists would be free to do whatsoever they wished to do. They accepted this idea. But the proposal was also very expensive. They could not afford the entire proposition themselves. Thomas Weston offered to add to their numbers certain people who were not separatists. They would call them the strangers. And these people would flesh out the numbers, and they would help to pay for the complete voyage itself and the establishing of the new colony. The new colony was to be established in the northern part of the Virginia colony, which was quite extensive in those days. Though this would actually have been a place that would have been on the Hudson River. And that's how far north Virginia went in those days. So everything was agreed upon, hands were shaken, documents were signed, and it was agreed. With what little money the separatists had left, they purchased their own vessel. They called it the Speedwell. It was not a large vessel, but it was theirs. And when it helped to carry them across the ocean to the New World, it would remain behind with them. They could use it to explore the coastline. They could use it for the fishing industry, but it would be very handy for them. So the separatists who were going to the New World would go aboard the Speedwell at Delfshaven, and from there we would sail across the English Channel to Southampton. There we would find another vessel that Thomas Weston had hired, called the Mayflower. We would split the people between the two ships and all of the supplies between the two ships. And the captain of the Mayflower, one Christopher Jones, he wanted us to proceed with great haste. There were still minor details to be taken care of, and he kept urging this haste because he said, if we left too late, we would lose the season. By the time we got to mid-ocean, we would be encountering the storms, the wintry storms that were coming up the eastern shoreline of the Americas. And so we tried to make as much haste as possible. We set sail on, I believe it was August the 5th of 1620. We sailed from Southampton. We had not gone terribly far before there was a great boom from one of the cannons of the Speedwell. When we inquired what was the matter, the captain told us she sprung a leak. We had to go into port and we had to make repairs. We went into Dartmouth, and there everything had to be taken off the ship, the cargo, the ballast, everything. She was caulked and sealed, so she was good again. They put everything back. All of this took a week. And Captain Jones was fuming because he said, we're losing the season. When everything was completed, we set sail again. This time, we went beyond Land's End. England was out of sight, and boom, the cannon went off again from the Speedwell. This time, the captain said, she's leaking worse than before. We had to go back to port. The nearest was Plymouth. We went to Plymouth. We abandoned the Speedwell. It was not seaworthy enough to make it across the ocean, which meant that everyone who still intended to go to the New World now had to come aboard one solitary ship, the Mayflower. She was not that large. Altogether, there would be 102 people carried by the Mayflower, in addition to a crew of about 30. This would be a very overcrowded vessel. So there you see the Mayflower just before we cast off from the Speedwell, got rid of the Speedwell. We're about to set sail. And here you see a cutaway of the decks. Now, we people who were taking passage on the ship, we had to satisfy ourselves. The leaders would be in what you see listed as the cabin in the stern of the ship. The captain had moved from his cabin up above to the poop house and taken that space. And then we, colonists, had what was called the gun deck or the 'tween deck area. You'll notice that large object there called the shallop. That was a vessel that we were taking with us. Again, it would belong to the separatists. It had to be cut in half to get down below deck to even fit. And then all of us colonists had to then squeeze down into the 'tween deck area. The Mayflower was only about 100 feet in length. She was about 24 feet in the beam wide, and she had a deckhead or a ceiling height of 5'4". If you were taller than that, throughout the voyage, you would have to be stooped over while you were below decks. And here were crammed all of our belongings, the men, women, the children, 2 dogs as well, all in this tiny space. We had about 55 feet of deck space for everyone to live. It was quite crowded. This is the space on the poop deck that was taken by the captain. Now, you see his berth there on the right, and the berth was so small you could not sleep laying down. You had to sleep semi-reclining in order to fit. And this was true of every berth on board the ship. No one got to lay down flat. Most families had to make do with something like this. This would be a cabin. Literally a cabin. No privacy whatsoever. The mattress rolled up to one side during the day. They could sit on the bench-like area. This could be in something that housed an entire family. And the earthenware jar that you see, that was the loo. That was where one relieved oneself and then poured it over the side. So there was not a great deal of space. It was very cramped. And here you see a configuration of what the ship would have looked like, fully loaded with all of the personnel as well. Imagine, my friends, if you had been passengers aboard the Mayflower. This was a voyage that would not be to your liking. You were crammed in this tiny space. And when it was rough weather out of doors, above decks, they would seal the hatches and put canvas over them. So there was no light and there was very little air below deck as well. You could cook during the good weather, but not during the bad, too much of a threat of fire. And so you had to eat cold food quite frequently. And the space because it was so crowded. The ship was rolling from side to side. You had women and children and men and people weeping and crying and bemoaning their fate, people getting sick, people seasick for the entire voyage, the smell and the stench, and the people in such close proximity, the smell, and the cooking smells and the smoke, and all of that was trapped in that tiny little area. And there we would be confined for most of the voyage. You cannot imagine the hellish nature of this trip. You have to realize ships in those days were never designed to carry passengers. They were never intended to carry passengers. But our little ship was now by herself and on her way. We set sail on September the 6th in the year 1620, and we were bound across the ocean. There was no extra vessel to help us if there was any problem. We were very fortunate on the first part of the voyage. The weather was clear, the winds were good following breezes, and we made a swift 2 miles an hour across the ocean. Now, that would change. The captain, Captain Christopher Jones, was correct in his estimation that if we would leave too late, which we did, we would encounter the storms in mid-ocean. And so we did. Our poor little ship would be tossed about. Imagine again if you were there in the 'tween-deck area, no light, no air. You're being tossed about from side to side. There are no windows. You cannot see what is happening out of doors. You're just being tossed around. It was not pleasant. Sometimes they would have to take in all the sails in the gales that were thrashing us. But the height of the stern castle and the forecastle of the ship was such that the ship itself served as a sail, and we were knocked about by the waves and by the stormy seas themselves. This is what it looked like on the upper deck. Imagine what it felt like down below if you were a passenger, and all the sound of the screaming and the crying that was going on. It was most unpleasant. One of our young men, his name was John Howland, became so frustrated with this. He couldn't take it anymore. He broke open one of the hatches. He climbed up on the deck to get a breath of fresh air, and he was immediately washed over the side by a massive wave into the ocean. He had the forethought that as he was going over, he grabbed hold of a halyard. He was being dragged along in the ocean alongside the ship like a fish in the water, going down 10 feet below the waves and then up to the surface again to catch a much needed breath of air. Fortunately, the crew saw him go over the side. They rushed to the side, grabbed hold of the halyard, and they pulled him in hand over hand, drained the water out of him, and he survived. He also promised that he would never again ignore the instructions of the captain. He was a very lucky man. He was washed over the side, he was in the ocean itself, but he survived. And he would go on to become one of the most prolific members of the Plymouth colony. He and his wife would have 10 children. Their 10 children would give them 32 grandchildren. The most important man. And he was someone who should have drowned on his way across the ocean. In those rare moments of calm, we were allowed to come up to the upper deck and get a breath of fresh air. But then we would be harangued by the crew. They would stand up on the forecastle, glaring down at us. One young man kept calling down to us, "You're all going to die. You're all going to die. And when you die, we'll take your bodies and we'll throw them over the side and feed the sharks. And we will take your possessions. At the end of this voyage, we will be wealthy, and you, all of you, will be dead." Unpleasant fellow. I never would join the separatist church, but I must tell you this. I do believe that the Lord God favored the separatists. The first person to fall ill on board the voyage was the young man who had harangued us. And he was the first to die, and it was he who was put over the side and fed to the sharks. Only one of our number would die on the outward voyage, a young servant by the name of Button, Master Button. And during the voyage also, there was one during the voyage and one just after we came to land. two births that would take place to balance the loss of life. Mid-ocean, Mistress Hopkins gave birth to a son that they called Oceanus, a very appropriate name. And once we got inside the hook of Cape Cod at our destination, Mistress White gave birth to a son that was called Peregrine. We lost two people, we gained two people. Life has a way of balancing itself. After 65 days at sea and traveling 2,750 miles, the shout was given, land ho! And we were very excited. We finally could set foot on terra firma, but we were cautioned by the pilot of the vessel. His name was John Clark. He had sailed these waters before, and he informed Captain Jones this was not the northern part of Virginia. He recognized the land and he said, this is what they call Cape Cod. We have missed our destinations, no doubt due to the storms. We have missed it by a few hundred miles. So we could not go ashore, we could not relax. And the captain tried to take us south, but he could not. It was the winter months now, it was November, and the gales were coming up the shore, and we were trying to sail a square-rigged ship into the wind, which you cannot do. You have to go at oblique angles, it's called tacking, to work your way into the wind. And the southern part of Cape Cod is known for its shoals, rocks beneath the water. We would have lost the entire ship and probably our lives. We had to settle for our first land site of Cape Cod. Of course, the separatists fell on their knees and gave praise to the Almighty for their deliverance, but they did not know what we were about to undertake. One of the things we had to do, because we were in the wrong location, is justify why we were there. And so the leaders sat down and they wrote a document. It was to be called the Mayflower Compact. And it said that we, the loyal servants of King James of England, are trying to better the glory of God by establishing a colony and also glorifying the crown. That we would, as a group, organize in such a way and create such laws as befitted those in England, and that we were still loyal subjects of King James of England. And then the men who were of age signed it. There were 41 of us. Now, I was not a separatist, but I signed it anyway as the military advisor. This is the Mayflower Compact itself, and you see the signatures at the bottom. This would be sent back to England along with the Mayflower itself and be given to the merchant adventurers. Now we had to find a place where we could settle. We took the launches, the launch, and then we had put together, we repaired the shallop, and we took 14 men. I put them in half armor and gave them matchlock muskets and swords. And then we went to shore, and then we walked the length of the spit of Cape Cod. And at one point, when we were towards the southern end of it, we came upon a group of Indians. We were surprised by them and they of us. They loosed some arrows at us, which missed, and we fired a round or two of our matchlocks and they scattered as well. These were the first and the last of the Indians that we would see for the next several months. We finally found on the opposite shore, we found a protected bay. We went back to the ship, we rowed back to the ship, and the ship Mayflower was brought into this harbor. It was a good harbor, but it was shallow. The Mayflower could not come any closer than a mile from shore. And so we had to use the launch from the ship and our shallop to row back and forth to the land. We tried to be able to get 15 men a day to go ashore to cut timbers and begin construction of our new colony, but it was very difficult. And it was difficult because it was now December. We landed here on December the 5th. And the gales and the storms meant that oftentimes we could not leave the ship. And sometimes we would get from the ship to the shore, and then we would be stuck there in a gale. And and we had to try to somehow overturn the boat and survive the cold wintry blasts away from any shelter whatsoever. Many of our supplies had been destroyed by the storms. Much of the grain had molded. The beer, the casks had broken open. What wasn't spilled out had turned sour, couldn't be used. We had very few supplies. Fortunately, the place that we had decided to establish this colony, we could tell that the Indians, the natives, had tilled the ground before, and there were mounds there. When we dug into the mounds, we found wicker baskets filled with some sort of grain. Ultimately, we learned that it was called maize. If it had not been for that grain that we found, we probably would not have survived the first winter. Work was very slow, and because the voyage had come to an end, many people were falling ill. They were falling ill very quickly from dysentery and from scurvy and also taking the fever. And the cold that was coming through, of course, made people sick as well, and people began to die. I would lose my wife, Rose, in that first winter, and many others would join her as well. In all, during the winter months, we would lose 50 people. We would take the dead ashore and bury them, but we would not mark their graves. We could not afford to let the natives know how few we were or how we were suffering. And so all of the graves that we created were unmarked there. Only, I suppose, by the grace of God did we survive that winter. And Captain Jones and his crew, they would lose over half of the crew of the Mayflower as well. And he was supposed to have simply brought us to the new land, disembarked all of our goods and our supplies, and then he was to go back. But he didn't. To his credit, he stayed. He offered to stay throughout, and in the spring of the year, he said he would leave when we were established there. Thank goodness for that. Thank goodness for the grain that we had discovered that would allow us to survive. We did have the shallop, we could fish, but I must confess, they are very good at prayer, but the separatists are terrible fishermen, and we were not successful in fishing. That first winter almost killed us, but we somehow, through the grit, through the bond of these people, the sacred bond of these people, they managed to hold together those few that did survive. And soon the weather would begin to change. The Mayflower would depart in April. They departed, and when they did so, they were supposed to take back cut timber, and they were supposed to take back furs and dried fish. We had spent the winter simply trying to survive. We had built one shelter, 20 feet by 20 feet. And that was all during the winter months. When the spring came, we began construction again. We had hoped to build 17 homes there. We were fortunate to have 7, actually, that we could complete. This is one of the first houses that we had that got us through the winter. It was actually sort of subterranean. It was dug down into the frozen ground itself, made it easier to keep warm. And those who were the sickest during those winter months were brought into these shelters to help them, to shelter them from the cold. We began construction. I was trying to instruct the people on how to defend themselves against the possibility of natives arriving, but no natives showed up until the middle of March in 1621. And then, despite all of my warnings to keep on the lookout, an Indian walked right into the colony himself. He put up his hand and he greeted us in English. His name was Samoset. He had been taught English by English fur traders who had come but not established a colony. They had come and they had gone, but he had learned a bit of English in that time. And he would introduce us to others as well. He introduced us to one native who was called Tisquantum. We would call him Squanto. And he was a man who also spoke English, He was one of about 21 natives who had been kidnapped by the fur traders, had been taken to England. He had been taught English and English ways. The idea was to take these Indians and teach them the English language so that when the fur trading was established in the new land, they would have interpreters who knew both the Indian language and the English language. That was the idea. Squanto would be our savior. He would be most helpful to us. We had just struggled to get through, but he would teach us how to plant this maize. He always told us, put a dead fish in the ground before you add the seeds, and that will help your plants to grow, your crops to grow. He would teach us how and where to fish, what game there was in the area, and how to hunt it, what to avoid. I doubt that we would have survived had it not been for the assistance of this brave man. There are our crops, our first crops that would come up. It was Squanto also who introduced us to the Sachem of the Wampanoag tribe. His name was Massasoit. And Massasoit and Edward Winslow, whom I mentioned earlier, they arranged a treaty between us. It was very simple. If Massasoit and his people were attacked, we would protect them. We would come to their assistance. If we were attacked, Massasoit and his warriors would come to our assistance. And in the times of peace, there would be free trade back and forth between the natives and the colony of Plymouth as well. It was as simple as that, and it was a good treaty for at least 10 to a dozen years. Little by little, we regained our strength. There were very few of us working, but we worked very hard. We started building these houses. We thatched them, as old English houses would be. We eventually put clapboards on the exterior of the houses. We used joinery that was common to the use in England as well. These houses would serve us well. They were not as pretty as one might find in Lancashire, but they served us well. Because our first native encounter was a native walking right into the middle of the colony, I cautioned the elders that they needed to create a palisade around the entire colony itself to protect us against hostile Indians who might come to attack. We couldn't allow them to enter as freely as Samoset and the others had. It would take about 2 months, but we built the palisade that you see here, and that would help us to be safe. We had to teach them how to defend themselves and how to survive in this new world. I had them build fighting platforms within the palisade itself so we could defend the colony. And here you see the colony after we had built many more houses. The last house that we built was the large structure that you see at the top of the hill. That was a blockhouse for defense, most important. And it was also the place where the separatists would worship, and it was the home of the governor as well. But if the walls had been breached, if indeed we were under attack, the last resort was for everyone to go to the blockhouse, and we would fend off the enemies from there. I had to teach the men how to use the matchlocks with the shooting sticks. I had to train them in military drills. There weren't that many of them, but I had to train them. I would divide all the men in the colony into 4 companies, each one assigned to a different wall, one to the north, one to the south, one to the east, one to the west. If the alarm bell rang, they were to immediately go to their homes, secure their weapons, and then go to their appointed positions to help defend the Plymouth colony. For the most part, it was peaceful. There were a few raids that I would have to conduct, and being a soldier, I also believed that it was necessary that we be preemptive, that we strike first if we knew that they were threatening us. Now, this was against everything that William Bradford, the new governor, believed. We would have many arguments, but ultimately, he would allow me to do what I saw fit to defend the colony, and ultimately, he would come to my defense. He would say, I may not agree with his approach, as being preemptive, but I have to confess that in the end, Captain Standish has kept the colonies safe. And that was all that mattered. At times, I would have to take native lives, those who were trying to attack us or plotting to attack us. And throughout my career, I tried to be preemptive, to attack them before they could attack us. It didn't always happen that way, but that was what I planned to do. Our first year, we had a good crop, not a tremendous harvest, but a good harvest. And we were grateful for our survival, grateful to our friends, the Indians, the Wampanoags, for helping us to survive in this wilderness. And we held a feast in gratitude for what we had received. These are one of our two communal ovens, and twice a week all of our bread would be baked in these ovens. And ultimately we would put together this feast of Thanksgiving. And to it we invited Massasoit and several of his warriors. Now, we were still only about 50, maybe a little more, but when Massasoit and his people arrived, it was Massasoit and 90 of his warriors who showed up. And fortunately, they hunted on the way to come to our feast. And they brought with them 5 deer that they had slain. So there was plenty of food to be had by all, plenty of good company as well. The feast would last actually for 3 days. Now in 1623, we would have a much greater feast. And that was because by that time, William Bradford, the governor, had divided up all the plots of land. They were no longer held communally by the colony, but they were given to individual members of the colony. And they were told, plant whatever you like, harvest your goods, keep them, sell them, trade them, whatever you wish. And for some reason, this increased the abundance of our crops enormously. It was very successful. And so was this Thanksgiving feast. Now, there were years when it was lean, when we might not hold a feast, but we tried to do it as regularly as possible to give thanks for our good blessings. Eventually, our relations with the Indians in the area would be strained. We were the first, the Plymouth colony, first to arrive, and we managed to survive. But others were coming shortly afterwards. In 1621, in the fall, there was a ship called the Fortune that brought 35 new people. They were very upset. The separatists were very upset because they weren't separatists. They were strangers. But they were still bodies, and they could help us to build and to improve the Plymouth colony itself. Initially, our friendship with the natives would last for at least 10 years. But then, with all of these other colonies coming, people did not treat the natives the same as we did, and there would be tension between us. Young warriors would go gather groups to them, and they would raid the various colonies as well. This became more rampant as the years went on. And eventually this would lead to bloodshed. Colonial blood would be shed, and also, of course, the blood of the natives as well. One chieftain called Metacomet, living to the south and the west of us, fancied himself King Philip II, King Philip, I should say. And King Philip was going to declare war on all the colonies. We, through our Indian friends, received word of this. I was no longer active in the defense of the colony, but I was still the military advisor. And I told them, as I always did, you must be preemptive. And Plymouth colony, several of the others joined together, and they put an end to King Philip's war before it could even begin. I would retire to the countryside. I would retire to a place that I called Duxbury. And Hobbamock, the great Indian warrior, would join me and my family. I had remarried, the name was Barbara, and we would live quietly in Duxbury, named after one of my family holdings in Lancashire. What you see here is the New England area and the Indian tribes that lived there. Now, those Indian tribes were many. There were thousands upon thousands of Indians. How did we survive that first winter? How were we allowed to survive that first winter? It was because, unbeknownst to us, in the year 1614, some English trappers and hunters came to New England, and they trapped and hunted. They didn't establish a colony, and then they left. But they also left behind smallpox. As it turns out, the natives had no defense against smallpox, and it was like a plague. It swept through New England. It swept through New England, and the result was that by the time that we had arrived in 1620, 90% of all of the Indians of this area had died of smallpox. That was why there was no resistance when we first came. That is why Massasoit wanted to treaty with us, because he was one of the tribes that was hit hardest, and there were very few people, and the other tribes, the larger tribes, were coming to them and demanding tribute of them, and so he wanted someone to defend him. It was this bit of luck that allowed us to survive against all odds. As I said, Plymouth was the vanguard, and others would follow, and soon many others would follow, and colonies were springing up all along the eastern shoreline itself. Here you see part of that inundation of colonists, Puritans coming from England, and the Scotch and Irish, and the people from the West countries. They came with many ships, with fleets of ships, and thousands of colonists. And eventually they were pushing back the natives, taking their land from them, not treating them well, and it was only understandable that this tension would cause an outbreak of violence against the colonies themselves. But for little Plymouth, we managed to survive that first winter. It was hard, and yet we survived it. And by the fall, we were growing our crops, and the village itself, the colony itself, was growing. And although we would have times of want, we would never starve again. And Plymouth would be considered one of the successful colonies in the New World. That is all that I can share with you of my story. And I hope that it has enlightened you in some way about this colony and about what life was like, the life of your forefathers was like many years ago. Again, I don't know how it is that I am able to communicate with you, but I thank you. I thank you for your time and your interest in my little subject. And so I bid you farewell.
Wow, thank you so much, Robert. We have a couple of minutes for some questions, just one or two, but we'd love to introduce Robert Dawson, who is here with us today. He played Myles so wonderfully. Thank you, Robert. So if you do have any questions, ladies, please put them in the questions box. I see we already have one about for Robert of how did you decide that you wanted to do an interpretation of Myles Standish? What drew you to him?
I do historic characters for a living, and for many years I was being invited by the Mayflower Society to come up to Palm Beach, and I did Captain Jones for them. I've done Myles Standish for them, and also John Howland. And John Howland is a marvelous character. He was supposed to drown, but he survived. And I told you he had a very large family. Many people in this country are related to him. Humphrey Bogart would not be around if it wasn't for John Howland. He's descended from him. The presidential Bush family. Alec Baldwin, the Baldwin family, they are all related to John Howland. If he had drowned, we would have lost a great many very talented people. The first woman to create a Valentine in America was descended from John Howland, and Brigham Young from the Mormon Church was descended from John Howland as well. So wow. This was just another character. I have over 100 characters that I do, and the Plymouth colony has given me a whole group of characters to explore.
Well, and one of the great things is the Dames actually donated the percol or the cop. Oh my gosh, I'm using the wrong word. Um, the Plymouth canopy, the that is
Pergola?
over the rock. Yes, there we go.
Okay.
Right now, they donated in 1922. So if you go to Plymouth Rock, you can see a Dames donation. We had a question. Did Myles have any children when he died?
Yes, yeah. There one of the the houses that was built at Duxbury, and a lot of times when you see the Myles Standish house, it's the house they show the house that was built by his son. So they did have several children. I haven't followed all of their lineage, but yes, he did have surviving children there at Duxbury.
When did Myles die, and how did he die?
As Myles, I couldn't tell you. It just came sort of suddenly. I'm not exactly certain of the year. It was not one of the things that I had concentrated on. Every week it's a different character, and so it's a focused study of the pertinent information. But he did live a good time, and he again he died at Duxbury. In a semi-retired state. Like I said, he would remain the military advisor for the rest of his life, but not active in the defense of Plymouth. And he and several others, I think William Bradford also moved away from Plymouth itself to Duxbury as well.
Could you talk a little bit about your process for doing the research? How do you find all this wonderful information?
With the Plymouth colony, I began with William Bradford. Years later, wrote his version of what happened. It is about 2 inches thick, and I didn't know exactly how large it was, and I started making copies of it from my computer, from the printer with the computer, and it just started adding up and up and up. It is a wonderful source. It's a first-person source. It is not always accurate. In William Bradford's version, he doesn't know the correct name of Christopher Jones, the captain of the Mayflower. He claims Christopher Jones was just a crew member on board the ship. So there are things that he gets wrong, but for a first-person perspective on what happened there, the William Bradford account is probably one of the best. And also a writer by the name of Nathaniel Philbrick, who wrote a book called Mayflower, and I would suggest it to anyone interested. He's a wonderful explorer. And I came to him through another character that I did, who's a man by the name of Nickerson, and he was aboard the Essex whaling ship that was struck intentionally by a whale and sunk. And Philbrick also wrote a book about that as well. So that was how I found out that he had written about the Mayflower as well. So I looked for different things, you know.
We have time for one last question, and that question is, what is the next character you will be playing? What's next?
This Thursday, one of my favorite characters. This Thursday, I am going to be Captain Edward John Smith. For those of you who know history, that's the captain of the Titanic. I was lucky when I was working for the Museum of Science. They had the Titanic exhibit there, and I was doing about 41 lectures a week, 50-minute lectures a week, and I loved the Titanic and knew it. There's only one other character I probably know better, and that would have been William Bligh of the Bounty, because I served aboard the Bounty for 8.5 years.
Wow.
But it's this wonderful source of information, and I actually had a relative, Bridget Mary Sullivan, who was on board and died aboard the Titanic. And I finally, just this year, found a photograph of my ancestors. So it was very nice. Ties the whole thing together.
Yeah, that's really special. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Robert. And now I'm going to turn back over the program.
Okay.
Hi, I'm committee member Betsy Tillman. Thank you, Robert Dawson, for a captivating performance of Myles Standish. To my mind, there is no better way to understand our historical figures in the times in which they lived than through Mr. Dawson's portrayals. Thank you for a very entertaining hour. Now, at this time, we would usually, with great fanfare, pick the winners of our beautiful raffle baskets and orchid arrangements, which have always been a fun finale and an integral part of our fundraising efforts. This year, that is not possible. But we have gathered together, with the help of the gift shop at the Face Show House, 3 wonderful door prizes. So in just a minute, I will announce those winners. But first, a big thank you to our members and guests who have honored us with financial support. We couldn't do what we do without your help. If you have not donated but would like to, it's easy. Look for an email coming from us about thanks and offers to help. Also in that email, you will find a link to the Florida Society's virtual auction. The auction is starting tomorrow and will last for 3 days. They have over 200 fantastic items, from trips to jewelry to household treasures. You may want to pick up something wonderful at a great price for a great cause. Thank you. And now I am going to announce our winners. And they are Frances Hansford, Grace Knight, and Lucy Hanford. Congratulations, ladies. We'll be sending you all an email so that you can respond with your address so that we can mail your prize to you. In closing, thank you for attending our first and maybe our last virtual reenactment. We hope to see all of you all next year in person, but we're very pleased the way this one went today. Take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones. Thank you again for coming. Bye-bye.